Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this, the final talk, final conversation in our series of Living Christian Faith. It's been a great privilege to be able to host these evenings for Knock Shrine. And I'd like to say I kept the best to last, and that would invite, I suppose, unfavorable comparisons. So I won't say that, but I'm certainly very privileged this evening to be joined by three of the PhD students we have in my department in Limerick, the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. It's quite not quite true to say three current PhD students, in that one of them, Maura Campbell, has just graduated with her PhD. My first opportunity to call her Dr. Campbell. I'm delighted to have you with us, Maura. And joined also by Margaret Naughton and by Judith King. And I'm going to give them a moment to introduce themselves to you. But just to say that you're familiar with Mary Immaculate College as a college of education, and primarily a lot of our work is with those who wish to be teachers, be it primary or secondary. But over the past number of years, we've had a thriving postgraduate community as well, doing master's and postgraduate PhD degrees. So it's a great privilege to have the people of the caliber of our three guests this evening. So I'll allow them to introduce themselves to you now, beginning with you, Maura, as the senior among us. Maybe you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Maura Campbell. I am from Kilconnell in East Galway originally, and I'm a primary teacher and an assistant principal in a large primary school, Catholic primary school in North County Dublin. I have three children in their 20s, and when they started in college, I also decided to go back and study. And the first thing I did was I did a master's with Dr. Eugene Duffy in Mary Immaculate College. And I followed straight on then to do the PhD with yourself, Eamon, in Mary I as well.
And we'll come to the topic of your dissertation, which was fascinating, in a few moments. But thanks for that, Maura. Judith, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks very much, Eamon, for the invite to this conversation. Yes, Judith King's my name. I'm from Donegal, but live mostly in Bray, County Wicklow. Happen to be locked down in Donegal at the moment, which I've been enjoying. I also started in primary education for a good number of years in my early career, and then I moved into other areas after actually a year of study, which included theology. So that was my first introduction to it. And at that point, it really completely changed my life. And after that, I worked in community development. I worked for a while with the Archdiocese of Dublin. And at the moment, I'm a psychotherapist. I have a small private practice in Bray. And I also teach in a third level college called the Dublin Counselling and Therapy Centre that does a master's in psychotherapy with the University of Northampton. And I suppose a big part of my work is in group facilitation. I work with a lot of organisations and groups in community and voluntary sector mostly, and with a considerable number of religious voluntary, like congregations and clergy and different things like that. So I'm delighted now to be studying again, yes, which we'll talk about again in a moment, yeah.
In a moment, fascinating, very, very interesting. And Margaret, tell us a little bit about your context, which I think will be of particular interest to a lot of our listeners this evening.
Thank you, Eamon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Margaret Naughton, a Kerry woman, born and reared. I have worked as a healthcare chaplain at the Bon Secours Hospital in Tralee for the last 10 years, and I'm about to start a new job at University Hospital Kerry in the next short while. Prior to that, I was involved in education, but I suppose my heart really is in healthcare chaplaincy. And of course, as everyone knows, this has been a difficult and challenging time for people like myself working in ministry, but also quite a privileged time. But obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about that later on.
And to stay with you for a moment, Margaret, most people, when they hear the word chaplain, they think of priests, be it Catholic or maybe belong to Church of Ireland. You're not the only lay chaplain, of course, in the hospital context, isn't that right?
Absolutely not. I suppose there's been a significant paradigm shift in terms of the understanding of chaplaincy in the last, I suppose, particularly 20 years or more. So there are now a lot of female chaplains working in hospitals and other healthcare facilities, alongside obviously ordained priests, both of the Catholic and Church of Ireland tradition.
Has it been a particularly difficult and challenging time for you over the last year since COVID struck?
It has really. In many ways, things have continued on as normal. You know, we've continued visiting, you know, we've continued supporting patients that we would in a similar way to pre-COVID. But in other ways, I suppose things have changed significantly, even from a very personal point of view, you know, public or personal safety. You know, we're exposed obviously to the reality of COVID. There's a risk of, you know, contracting COVID. You know, we have had to look at other ways of ministering. We've used technology in ways that we wouldn't have used before. You know, I think of one experience of watching a funeral mass with a patient on an iPad. His wife had died and he wasn't in a position to attend mass. It was probably the lowest point of my ministry in the last year, really. The couple had been married for 60 years. And he wasn't well enough to leave the hospital, and we sat in a small room watching the funeral mass. Now, thank God we had the live streaming, you know, option, because obviously, you know, that it would have been even more heartbreaking for that man not to be able to partake in any way in his wife's funeral mass. But yeah, it's just been so difficult. People dying on their own. You know, obviously a lot of people are not allowed to visit their loved ones at the moment. So it has been very challenging, very, very difficult to hear.
I know what you're saying. Personally, my dad, who's living with me, as you all know, I think, ended up in hospital again last week. But set up in the University Hospital in Limerick, which I think was wonderful, called PALS, which I hadn't come across. Some people, I think some young people, volunteer to connect patients with their loved ones, and it was wonderful. They rang me with a WhatsApp screen so I could talk to my dad there, and that was really, it was a wonderful service to provide. So that's a very clear context of service that you're involved in, Margaret, and we'll come to your thesis in a moment. Just to go back to you for a moment, Maura, the school, of course, and we have had a number of the young teachers who I work with in Mary I in one of the earlier programs. But you're, in a sense, in the management side of a primary school at the moment. Has it been a particularly difficult and challenging time for yourself?
Yes, like Margaret said, you know, life goes on, children need to be taught, and at the same time, we have to be cognizant of the disease. So there is a lot of social distancing and sanitisation coming in and out of school. But learning is still the priority, and the children's happiness and their well-being. So we just get on with it. And, you know, for the most part, we've been face-to-face, and we've been very lucky that we can teach online. And even though it has limitations, it has been a wonderful experience. And I know the children will use those skills again in secondary school, third level, and right throughout their own lives, that they become independent learners, become independent workers. So we all have learned something from this.
Do you think it has changed, in a sense, the way parents might see their role in the Catholic Church? At least we claim the parents are the primary educators of their children. Do you think it has had an impact on realising that in any tangible way? Do you think it has helped in any way?
I think it has. Parents have become more engaged with their children's learning because they know that the teacher hasn't got the hands-on facility with the children. So I would love to see that continue as well, probably not to the same level as they have to. It's different for older children. They can manage a lot more easily than the younger children. But parents have been very, very supportive of their children and of the school situation. And we've nothing but supportive words heard, you know, from parents. So it has been a good experience in that sense. But the children are very, very happy to be back in school, and so are the teachers.
Back with their friends, yeah. And I know that, you know, people have been giving out, well, some people have been giving out about teachers somehow enjoying the fact that they've been off, but they haven't been off, no more than myself working and teaching. If anything, it has been much more intense and much more complicated because teachers actually care about their pupils, and
Yes.
that's right, and there's been a sense of frustration. I can sense the sense of joy among those teachers. I know that they've been able to get back into the classroom.
Yeah, joy is the right word.
Now, Judith, as a facilitator and as a therapist, how has the last year been for you?
Yes, similar to the others. For me, absolutely everything has gone online. I did a small little bit of one-to-one psychotherapy work last July and August when things opened up a little bit, just with 2 of my clients. And so it has all gone online. And like Margaret said and Maura said, I mean, what a wonderful additional thing to have. And we couldn't have done anything without it. But I would agree, there have been a lot of losses as well. And like in my group work and in my teaching and even in the client work, you pick up a lot from what's going on almost below the verbal, the non-verbal, what's going on for people in their bodies, or even tuning into the energy in a group in the room. That's so difficult to do online. So it's almost like you get whatever's from here up and everything below is no longer available to you. And like I would have known I use that a lot in my work, but I would have never known the extent to which I depend on it to tune into what's happening, what's going on in a person, what's going on in a group. And to be without all of that is really, really challenging. It's a huge loss to the work, I think. I think people have been wonderful and people have compensated and you know, I suppose even the facial, we're seeing our own faces more, we're seeing other people's faces more up close, and that has brought another dimension to it, and all that's helpful as well. But there are a lot of losses, I think, things that we weren't even maybe able to name before this, that we'll all be glad to get back to, I think.
So you do think that there'll be a lot of, you know, because a lot of people are saying, oh, we're going to see an awful lot more people working from home, working online. But you think we will really want to get back to face-to-face?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely no replacement for it. You know, say in psychotherapy in particular, we talk about this thing called social regulation, you know, where we literally become more at ease by physically sitting in the presence of someone else. So it literally can bring down people's heartbeat and it can literally ease them, obviously if the person isn't a triggering person for them. So like imagine that people have been doing without all that. They've been doing without all that. Just the natural regulation that quietly peters over and back between people. To me, the loss of that is colossal. And I think we need to really get back to that. I can see that there's going to be much more online, yes, and it's a benefit and it's good for the environment that we're driving less and flying less, and that will and ought to continue. But I think we do need contact with loved ones, even with non-loved ones. I was reading recently that we have about 120 contacts that aren't even close, whose engagement with us every other week or whatever is quite important to our well-being. I mean, isn't that phenomenal? You know, these just casual people that are part of our lives, and we're all doing without that at the moment. Yeah.
Now, in addition to those extraordinary full lives that you're all leading and making a tremendous contribution, clearly, and I know that from knowing you so well in your respective professions and service really to other people, you decided to do PhDs at a theology department. And just let's tell our audience a little bit about the great work you've been doing. Let's also just clarify, PhD, at least with us, is at least a four-year period of study, usually a substantial piece of original research where you're making a contribution to the body of knowledge. You're helping us to know and understand something that wasn't known or understood as well before. And I know, because I know each of your work, you're doing this in a really, really impressive way. And maybe more because you're out the other side of it. Maybe we'll begin with you. And it's not easy to summarize in a few sentences what you researched and what you discovered. But anyway, do your best to bring it together for us.
Well, my research was about the role of Christian faith in the lives of a cohort of Catholic primary school principals in the Republic of Ireland. So I'm passionate about Catholic schools, not alone do we give or try to give a quality education to children, but we also, it's an open secret that we tell the story of Jesus Christ within the schools, within Catholic schools. So my faith is important to me, and I'd like children to also know the story of Jesus Christ for their lives. And principals in particular are really an important cohort to investigate, to see what's going on in their minds, what's their worldview, what's their faith dispositions. Because while teachers teach religious education, principals set the culture. And we have a Catholic ethos within the schools. And I wanted to know what was their cover stories and their sacred stories. I wanted to know what was going on underneath the surface. And so I found that there was a deep well of faith among most of the principals that I interviewed. So I interviewed 18 principals. And really for most of those principals, God was like a loom on which their life tapestries were strung. So while God was the loom, they were the designers, and their faith was an integral part of their lives, and is an integral part of their lives. I suppose there is a caveat in the sense that somehow Jesus Christ has become faded or maybe brushed aside. He isn't center to a lot of their faith, and it is, their faith is mixed up with culture, is mixed up with life. And I'd like to see that there would be a bigger emphasis on faith development for teachers and for principals, so that they develop a relationship with Jesus Christ. So that was my research.
One of your key recommendations was the need for greater faith development.
Greater faith, yeah.
It came up in the discussion we had with teachers as well, young teachers. They felt they were not given enough support, in a sense, to develop their own faith. Anything else that was of significance coming out of your research that's worth mentioning, Maura?
Grandparents in particular have been very supportive of children's faith and fostering their grandchildren's faith. I suppose we need to come together more as family, parish, and schools. Schools are doing a terrific job, but we can't do it on our own. There's no substitute for parents and family fostering their own children's faith. So that was one of the key findings as well of the research.
Yeah, that was a key insight. That's wonderful. We could talk an awful lot more about it, but we'd better keep moving just time-wise to get a chance to hear about everybody's research. Margaret, we'll turn to you, and you're doing a similar kind of piece of research in the sense of that you're interviewing hospital chaplains, and you're looking under the bonnet, if you like, of hospital to see what's going on.
Exactly, yes. I suppose chaplains, as people of faith, we come from obviously a faith perspective, and I was quite curious to find out, what do people of faith working within a faith context and out of a faith context, how do they understand that? How do they understand what faith is? So I have been undertaking a theological reflection on faith, trying to ascertain the meaning, value and significance of faith in the life and ministry of contemporary healthcare chaplains. So I interviewed 26 chaplains from different contexts and different situations, male and female, ordained and non-ordained. So I had a nice broad stretch of the spectrum of people working within the ministry. So it's been very interesting to try and, I suppose, get a snapshot into, as you say, almost looking under the bonnet, to go back to the real fundamentals and see, what do people working within a faith-based ministry understand faith. So it's been a fascinating exploration.
What has been your most, shall we say, surprising or insightful finding so far?
Just the variety of understanding of faith. I suppose I came maybe with a slight naivety to the project. I suppose as a person of faith, working within a faith-based ministry, I assumed that my colleagues would be, I suppose, loud and bold in their articulation of their understanding of faith. And actually, when push came to shove, many of them struggled hugely to put words on what is very core and intrinsic to their very being. So it was interesting. Some of them actually used imagery more readily than they would have used word to explore their meaning and their understanding of faith and of God and of the greater issues around that. But consistently, each of them would have considered faith to be a core part of their life and of their ministry, but came from many different angles and many different understandings. So it's been a very fascinating, for me, a worthwhile project.
And of course, the hospital chaplains you're engaging with are from a variety of religions and denominations within Christianity. But I was just reminded me there that one time I was in the hospital with a friend who was very, very seriously ill. In fact, he'd had an aneurysm, and it was touch and go whether he would live. And the Muslim doctor who was minding him came out to me, and he said, and he knew I was a priest, he said, I think it's important now that we pray for him, And in a sense, I was too busy with the practicalities, and it was reminded me to pray at that time. Have you found anything enriching about the interfaith context in your study about hospital chaplains?
Yes, I suppose our training model, to start with, the CPE program that most of us undertake, is an interfaith, multi-faith context. So I suppose we're all equipped to minister to people of all faiths and none. But I suppose what was interesting was that there were varying levels of confidence amongst my colleagues in relation to, I suppose, being able to minister or pray or use rituals effectively with people of other faiths and none. So I suppose that's probably an area, particularly when you consider that Ireland is becoming increasingly, I suppose, secular and pluralist, that maybe as a ministry we might need to shine a little bit more light into and maybe come to a greater understanding of the other faith traditions and the other requirement of the other, I suppose, fundamentals that are in other traditions and belief systems. I suppose we've come predominantly from a Catholic perspective, and I suppose we're very comfortable within that, and we're very comfortable in articulating a Catholic faith and even a Christian faith, and we're able to support, I think, very well as a ministry those of that tradition. We might need to open up maybe the other side of our ministry a little bit more, and maybe reach out and ask for help. I think we can be slow to ask for support from our colleagues, from other traditions.
Just as a matter of interest, and this may be a little bit provocative to ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I mean, if you're applying for a post as a hospital chaplain now, do you have to be a person of faith?
Well, I suppose if you look at the HSC circular, it is there is a requirement for an honours degree in theology. That is, I suppose, a core requirement. And since 2012, in order to be accredited as a chaplain, people applying for certification need to have an honours degree in theology. So at the moment, yes. Within the Irish context, there would still be a requirement to have theological formation. Now, maybe other people might disagree with me, Eamon, but to be employed and paid and professionally recognised, there is still that requirement to be theologically formed and to be people of faith.
Well, I mean, of course, the two aren't necessarily the same thing. You can have a degree in theology, but not necessarily be a person of faith.
Absolutely.
In the college, we had a student who was self-identified as an atheist doing theology, and she complained that there was far too much talk about God in the program. And my colleague famously said to her, that you doing theology is like a vegetarian seeking to work in a butcher shop, Anyway, it's great to know that there is such great care of people at a time of great vulnerability, as one is as a patient in a hospital setting. And it's great to know you're doing this research, Margaret, and we look forward to seeing it published in due course. And I'm going to go over to speak to Judith about her dissertation, which also is a very, very fascinating study. In the context of Knock as a place of pilgrimage, I think it's interesting, but Knock isn't the subject of your research, Judith. Pilgrimage is, and if you tell us a little bit about your work.
Yes, indeed, pilgrimage is, and yeah, I think it is interesting that Knock is one very important place of pilgrimage for Irish people. I am fascinated by pilgrimage myself. I did the Camino for the first time a number of years back. I've done Lough Derg in more recent years, and both these pilgrimages are very strenuous on the body. They demand a lot. And I was really curious about that. I wanted to know more about that. Why would people choose to actually do something very physically strenuous as part of their pilgrimage journey? So I did I also interviewed, like the other two theologians here, interviewed people who had experienced the pilgrimages, either pilgrimage and then a small cohort of 6 who had experienced both pilgrimages. And I'd interviewed those in 2018 and 2019, and it's been absolutely fascinating as well. They're both very strong pilgrimages, both very different pilgrimages. The spirituality in the Lough Derg pilgrimage would be much more definite, as it were. And a big part of the pilgrimage rituals, whereas people doing the Camino, in a sense, can take or leave the spirituality apparently side of it. But I was much more curious about what people were seeking in that. What are they seeking in even doing pilgrimage? Why would pilgrimage be soaring in popularity in a time of, as Margaret said, secularity and pluralism and all of that? And it really seems to me that people are thirsting for the sacred. People are hungry for a greater horizon of meaning. They're tired being just Facebook minions or Amazon payment persons, that they have much more in their lives that they want to be about and for. And I think when people step out and go on pilgrimage, they sort of state that almost without saying it with words. They say, you know, I'm more than this. I have a much bigger horizon. My interests are much deeper and wider and broader, and I have a big soul journey that I'm also on, and that's also what people are doing in pilgrimage. And so it's really fascinating to me that there's such an interest in it. And of course now they're not possible because of the time, which I think even makes it the need of them even more obvious in a way, you know. Yeah.
You did a number of interviews, Judith, because I'm working with you on this thesis. Yes. I'm familiar with them. What can you recall? What really moved you personally in the stories you heard? Just again, speaking in general terms, obviously, but what actually moved you in the stories you heard?
Yes, I interviewed 31 pilgrims, and their stories, the depth that people had themselves, the amount of sacredness in their own story, the things they noticed, what they were willing to share with me about, like, very special moments that they had. Just very, very moved. Like people were doing the pilgrimage for other people or in memory of other people. And they would be telling me about those things, and I was deeply moved by that. And very significant percentage of my pilgrim interviewees had a very profound moment. Some of them had even more than one moment, which they were willing to relate to me. And like, we were both in tears at times in different interviews, me listening and they recalling and recounting these moments. So I was literally moved to tears at times with people's recounting. And, you know, I'm sure if other people see pilgrims walking on the Camino pathways, or indeed walking around the beds in Lough Derg, there's so much going on in the heart and mind and spirit of all these people. And I just think there's so much there for us to hear. And in a way, they have so much. Their story is like a way of telling other people about God and about God's life, and so much as they're in search of God themselves. But their own stories, in a way, are testaments to their own journey of God. And I really, I suppose my hope and desire would be that people would hear more pilgrim stories and would hear more from pilgrims, and would find ways of letting them speak their experience, because I think it's quite powerful.
I'm just trying to, in a sense, hear what the three of you are saying together in a way. And this hadn't struck me before, but I suppose we haven't had this kind of conversation before. But each of you are giving people their voices, in a sense. You're giving them a chance to tell their stories. Margaret, her fellow hospital chaplains, Moira, her fellow teachers or principals, and you, pilgrims, and as a fellow pilgrim in a sense, to tell their story of encounter and also of desire for that encounter to be honoured or affirmed or recognised, and to put a language or a frame around it in some respects. Isn't that right? And to articulate it and to have it nourished. I mean, particularly with you, Maura, you were in your research, the hunger that's there maybe not always responded to adequately among principals for support in their own personal faith journey as well. Would Maura, if you just pick that up for a moment, would that be, do you see any of these kind of connections across the three stories we've been listening to?
Well, what Judith said about people's personal stories and their encounter with God also happened in my interviews, so that a lot of the time people think of teachers or particularly leaders as people that aren't human, but principals are very human, and I heard their personal stories of their own suffering in their own lives, and that moved me as well. I think that was the most moving thing. They were willing to tell their stories, but what they were also able to do, particularly the ones who had suffered traumatic experiences, that it brought them to a deeper level of faith, that they turned to God in those incidences, and they became, their relationship with God was deepened because of their suffering. And not alone that, but they also wanted to let that story of God to be told to children, so that when children, I think the whole essence is that when children go through their own lives, that they have the anchors of faith there, so that they can turn to their faith.
Powerful.
So that was the most moving thing, yeah.
You want to add anything to that, Margaret, from your experience?
Yeah, I was just thinking there that as chaplains, we're listeners and interpreters of other people's stories, and yet it came across very clearly from my own research that chaplains themselves can feel silenced. It's ironic that those who are listening to others very often don't have a voice themselves. And a bit like what Maura said there, so many of them shared experiences of personal suffering and personal crises that maybe they've never really had much of an opportunity to explore with a fellow professional. Because I suppose I had the advantage in many ways that, as a chaplain, interviewing other chaplain colleagues, I was being, I suppose, given a very sacred task, really, because they were placing into my hands their narrative, their story, their pain. And I was very conscious, and I still am, to be honest, of almost the weight of that burden and that expectation, because we all have a story, but our story is very unique and precious to us. Just like our name is, our name defines us, but so does our life journey, and so does our life experience. And like part of my research was asking people about their own personal faith journey. And of course, a faith journey can often come out of a crisis or a conversion experience. So I was very conscious of the weight of responsibility of trying to hold in a very sacred way each and every one of those 26 stories that I was given to share with other people, of course, because people freely shared and freely gave of their time. But the human narrative is such a precious, precious gift, and to share it so openly and so unrestrictedly. You know, sometimes I think we forget that, you know, working as a chaplain or working as a teacher or working as a therapist, you know, it's a very sacred and very safe space for people.
You know, it's each of you in a sense has spoken about the sacredness of your research. A lot of people listening might think that theology, or sorry, I shouldn't impose my preconceptions, but many people think theology is abstruse. It's, you know, in fact, you often hear media say, oh, we're not going to go into the theology of it, meaning we're not going to go into the, you know, pie in the sky. And yet your work is extraordinary down to the earth, very real. It is about literally giving life, about separating death from life, giving life to people, bringing people to life. And, you know, I know the amount of, okay, you've talked about the number of interviews, and these are what are called structured interviews, semi-structured interviews, require a huge amount of care being taken, but you respect the client, the interviewee, you respect the sacredness of the encounter, that you, in a sense, keep yourself at one level removed from it so that you don't oppose your views, that what you're hearing is representative of a much wider population. It's very, very detailed and very careful scientific work. And then all the literature you must read and review so that you make the findings are scientifically you know, accurate and so on. And I just think it's very reassuring for people to know that this kind of scholarship lies behind and will be nurturing others in the field and in the various professions. And it's a real privilege. You know, people say to me, oh, how could you keep your teaching theology now, whatever, 22 years? How do you keep alive in that? Because these are the kind of people I'm working with, you know. I mean, every encounter is precious. It's a real gift to have these kinds of wonderful moments together. So we're beginning to move towards a close. Our time has moved very quickly, I think. But I suppose, what would you say maybe to people to encourage them to do what you've done, to take that step a little bit back from your professions while still sticking with them, but actually to choose to do research in theology? I often say to people, life is just too short not to do theology, but I'd love to hear what you've got to say about that. Judith.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that sometimes the assumption is that it's kind of dusty and lots of very dense reading. I must say I have absolutely loved the reading, the theology for this. There are some absolutely incredible contemporary theologians writing in the world now. I would love to put posters up here, there, and everywhere for everybody, because there's such good thinking, not sort of reactionary, sort of sectarian stuff, but really good thinking about theology and about the Christian story and about its core message. As you said earlier, it's about life and about the affirmation of life. It's just an absolutely fertile, rich field. Like even the amount that's been written in the last 15 years, it's extraordinary stuff. It's so life-giving, and it's been a pure treasure trove, and it's really added to my own life in such an incredibly powerful way. Because, you know, as people of faith in a culture that's going through a very difficult time with its own faith history, you sometimes can get pigeonholed by it, and it's hard to actually say, well, actually, this is a really incredibly life-giving message. This is one that will bring fortitude and joy and meaning and purpose, and there are people writing about it so well. Yeah, wonderful. It's really terrific. I'd encourage everybody to do theology.
Laura.
I found it just as fascinating. It was a wonderful journey of the head, the heart, and the hands. So the theology is head, because you're doing this reading, but also I was also brought on a spiritual journey. I was very, very lucky. While I was studying theology, I went to the Holy Land with Father Benny McHale from Athenry, and that was a terrific journey. So that brought the the theology to life, in the sense that when you go to the Holy Land, you see the geography, the history. So you're dealing with the past, the present, and the future. And I also joined Christian meditation. So Noel Keating has Christian meditation on Wednesdays and on Sunday nights as well. And I joined those. So it wasn't just the theology, it was a spiritual journey. And it was like God was taking my hand, and I got to know him more. And it was a wonderful journey. And getting to know the people in the department and meeting people like Judith and Margaret. I mean, the people also make that just a joyful experience.
And Margaret, a word from you on this?
It has, I suppose, for me, Eamon, it's been a transformative journey. It certainly, studying theology isn't for the faint-hearted, and it is, you know, it can at times be difficult to combine work and study. And, you know, when you have a chapter due in and you're thinking, oh God, is this ever going to end? But I have to say the pluses definitely far outweigh the minuses. I have been transformed in ways I never thought possible, stretched, pulled, and, pulled in so many different directions. But my heart has been changed, my faith has been changed, my ministry has been changed, my whole outlook in life has been changed, all for the positive, and I suppose I see it just as an opportunity to grow, to expand, and just to test myself. In some ways, studying theology demands a lot of me as a person, but it has also helped me to sit with the difficult questions that people ask each and every day of me as their chaplain. So definitely, if you have any inkling of a thought of studying theology, just go out there, ask the questions. If you don't make the call or send that email, you'll never know. If you don't take a chance, you just don't know what's going to happen.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all, each of you, so much for each of your comments and insights, and just sharing your own story. I think it'll be of real interest to those who have joined us this evening. Just want to say that we're very blessed at the moment in Limerick that we've received a lot of funding for research in the area of Catholic education. So if anybody listening this evening knows anybody interested in doing a PhD in that area, we'd love to hear from you. The scholarship applications are open until May the 1st. So just to give a little plug as we conclude this evening. Also, I want to, because this is our last seminar together, our webinar, to thank Father Richard Gibbons for inviting me to lead this series, to thank Martin, who has been our IV person in the background, running the system for us, and of course Maria Casey on the ground in Knock Shrine. We are so thrilled for Knock having been designated by the Holy Father as an international shrine of devotion to Our Lady and the Eucharist, and we really take great pride in that. I do also as a priest of the Chum Diocese, and we ask that it may be a great source of blessing for all those who are pilgrimage to it. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us throughout this series, and all the very best now as we conclude Lent and celebrate Easter in whatever way we can, and hopefully it will still be a very meaningful Easter experience for each one of us. Thank you to each of you again tonight. And now I'm going to ask Maura to lead us in a prayer just to bring this evening to a close for us. Thank you, Maura.
Well, since last week we celebrated St. Patrick's Day, I'd like to pray St. Patrick's breastplate. Christ be with me, Christ be beside me, Christ be before me, Christ be behind me, Christ be on my right hand, Christ be on my left hand, Christ be with me everywhere I go, Christ be my friend forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all very much, and a very good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amen.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Maura.